I'm a teacher, and I've been teaching since I was 22 when I was a teaching assistant in structural engineering. And I want to start this lecture by recognizing the teachers I had. I was very, very lucky. I was at school at a time when there were terrific people who had come mainly from Europe, to escape the oppression there of various kinds. In my first year in architecture, first graduate year, which was the first year period, because that's the way we didn't have undergraduate architecture, I had a great teacher, Serge Chermayeff, over there on the left. His family fled Russia during the revolution, and he was raised and educated in England. He went back to Europe as a young architect, traveled a lot, and returned to England, where he met Eric Mendelsohn, the pioneer expressionist architect, and they collaborated on a number of projects. I'm showing this one, the Delaware Pavilion on the seaside at Bexhill. And really an amazing building. The stair goes up in the middle, and then this fantastic light fixture comes down in the stair. Serge was an intellectual, and he saw architecture as a rational construct that could be, at least the heart of which could be diagrammed and worked out logically. His Community and Privacy, which he wrote with Christopher Alexander, became a standard in architectural education. Here you see some examples of his diagrams, and we were put through the paces in first year of figuring things out. Over at the, let's see if, does this work? No. The picture of him with the caricature by some students in the background in his office. And I love that drawing on shelf paper. And that's the way he looked when he was displeased with one of your submissions. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to get the hang of this. There we go. And again, his studio in Wellfleet on the Cape, he was fascinated by American wood architecture and very much interested in how you could use the skin of a building to change the environment. This is sort of a classic from the late 40s and early 50s. The next teacher I want to recognize is Jerzy Zoltan. He was one of the 10 in Team 10, along with people like Aldo van Eyck, the Smithsons, Shadrach Woods. They were a splinter group from the classic modern architecture who wanted to steer modernism closer to urbanism and to more of a social direction. He's Polish. He was one of the Polish army that charged the Nazi tanks in 1939 and was captured, spent the war in the prisoner of war camp, and continued his education in architecture by corresponding with Le Corbusier through the Red Cross mail system. After the war, he worked with Le Corbusier and for 5 years, and was in charge of the Unité d'Habitation in Marseille. The project here, he was invited as one of, I think, a half dozen competitors for a competition of doing a museum in Berlin of 18th and 19th century art in the complex, you have Hans Scharoun's Philharmonic Hall, Scharoun's National Library, and Mies's 20th Century Modern here. So the task was, how do you do another museum in that complex? And one of the aphorisms, as it were, of Team 10 was, a building is a city, and a city is a building. And this project shows that literally. He did, or we did, he asked me, along with a number of other people, to be part of the team, a mat building, a horizontal building that's more like a city than an individual building. It's a simple texture, an alternation of gallery space and open space, sources of light. And so this is it doesn't compete with the other buildings. It becomes more like a village. And this, I think, is one of the most interesting mat schemes that are carpet schemes that it's been done. Unfortunately, it didn't get built, but that's something we all have in common with the students. Our projects don't get built. Here's the basic model. And some of Jerzy sketches about different ways of using the space between galleries to bring in light and to make special exhibits and what have you. Finally, this is José Luis Sert, who I worked with for a little over 3 years, and he is, or was, the architect who worked with Picasso. They collaborated in 1937 on the pavilion in Paris that housed Guernica, the great anti-war painting that Picasso did. And after that, really, both of them had to leave Spain because of Franco. And they were on the other side, the losing side. So he came to the United States, later became dean at Harvard. And this project over here on the right is the Government Center Chapel proposal. I was in charge of it, and again, it didn't get built either, but it was close to José Luis's heart. A very simple, small building that he was experimenting with bringing southern light in and then projecting onto the walls of the square space, diagonally square space, different colors and the shapes of liturgical symbols that were hung in these light towers. The light towers themselves owe their inspiration to the wind towers of traditional Persian architecture, except these are now oriented south to the light. We see the front up and then the back. I put together some sketches that José Luis did, showing some of his sources. There was a particular way that light came in the cathedral at Toledo that he liked, and he basically tried to reproduce that. And then the brickwork was similar to a church in Cayenne, France. These are his process some of his sketches. There are just reams of them. Finally, a short story. A friend in Barcelona one day said, let's go look at all the regional architecture of Josep Maria Pujol, who was a great modernista architect there, who with Gaudí did some of the most famous buildings along the in Barcelona, the Casa Mila and the Casa Batlló. And he was a master architect. So we got up, my friend said, we're going to go see this little church up in the town of Vistabella. So we go up there, and I looked in the guidebook, and I saw this plan. And I said, my God, that looks familiar. He says, we did a plan very similar. And my friend laughed and said, yes, but Pujol was Sert's teacher. And Sert was his student at the time he was designing Vistabella. So you can even see in the massing and the geometry of the facades a resonance between the two. Can they bring this up so it doesn't, they can't change it?
Not really.
That's too bad. No way of changing the focal length.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay. But there's some stuff at the bottom that we're missing. This is my first building. A young man came into our little office and said, you know, I'm a geologist and I represent a major company that wants to build, wants to market spring water. We think there's a future in bottled water. This was long before there was a future in bottled water. And we have a spring up in northern Massachusetts, and we want to build a prototype building, a bottling plant for it. And we have to keep it a secret. And we want you to design it. We'll build the first version. And if that's successful, then we'll build a lot of them at various spring heads all over the country. So we started, this is the page from Architectural Record. We set out to build this prototype, which had to be expandable 100% while not shutting down the process. They expected if it was successful, they would keep expanding and keep running it. So that became a real issue. So what we proposed was a series with two parallel walls as a prototype. Then the walls could then be fitted to any particular landscape, customized. And then the superstructure, made of steel and corrugated siding, could then just be dropped on to these two walls which formed rails on either side. It was a very simple idea. Then for expansion, you could continue those walls. These are the diagrams that they needed to convince themselves that this would indeed work, that they could expand 100% quickly without shutting down. And so the two poured concrete walls, which were very effective because they used forklifts to move the product around. And if one of those forklifts hits a wall, even a concrete block wall, it it does serious damage. So the bottling plant portion is on the right, and then the offices. Trucks go in, get loaded, and the old bottles come out, then they go through. So it's a through process. You can see what the interior looked like. They wanted a very positive, sunny, clean, fresh image for the product. And so we put a series of large skylights on each side to wash the walls with direct sun. The back wall there that you see can be all unbolted and reused should it be expanded. You can see the concrete walls, and the structural steel went up in one day. The fieldstone was gathered from old farms that had long disappeared in that New England woods, and we articulated as part of the landscape of the plant with those. You know, the functions had to be dealt with very pragmatically, and this is a boiler for heating the hot water to a very high temperature to sterilize the bottles, and the loading dock, all these things we approached very conventionally and tried to get them to hang together through materials and alignments and, you know, traditional architectural moves. The frames, the prefabricated frames that were put in place were then quickly adjusted to plumb with these diagonal rods, so that then the siding people could come in right away and clad it. There's no overlap, so that each one of these bays can be unbolted as needed, particularly in the back. And that whole rear elevation can be unbolted and reassembled any number of bays later. This is a project that I did with John Marushek, a very talented professor at UT Arlington. This project and the next one. This is a competition, a national competition for what to do with what's called Northerly Island in Chicago, the site of Meigs Field, or what used to be Meigs Field, in Lake Michigan. The Northerly Island is a little piece of land that you see in the upper photograph, was part of Daniel Burnham's scheme, great scheme for the waterfront of Chicago. It was a series of islands he had proposed all the way down the coast, but they only built one, the Northerly Island, and it was the site of the World's Fair Century of Progress in 1933. That's the sepia image up there. The one below shows how it was developed with a runway as Meigs Field, the in-town airport for Chicago, which later became, you know, just a private plane airport. But the idea is what to do to reuse Meigs, that piece of land. So what we did was said, look, we're going to reconstitute a little bit of Burnham's plan and make a series of islands. And just like Northerly Island was created by the dredging, we would change it by dredging. And mounded up the earth into these series of islands, leaving the runway, the concrete runway, intact in the water, almost like it was floating in the water, and making beaches and swimming areas on the other side. Surrounding the whole thing was a bicycling and running track, so people could exercise and do all sorts of things there. The runway was used for a number of functions, for parades, festivals, and also a place to start growing trees, which later were transplanted to the islands and then later were used as new street trees for Chicago. We were fortunate enough to share first prize in this competition. Here are some of John's sketches, and here's what it might have looked like from the air. They didn't build it, but it was great fun to do, and it was a bit of radical urban design that I'm still quite pleased with. Next project you're familiar with, the Dallas Police Memorial, was also a competition, a local one that we were lucky enough to win. And the program was very simple. Commemorate the names of fallen police officers for Dallas and provide a space where an annual remembrance service could take place. So with that, we came up with a scheme, an early scheme that then developed into the one you'll see. This shows the memorial and its relationship to the site. We worked a lot on relating it to the site and to the City Hall. It pulls back from the street to face the flags on City Hall Plaza of the United States and Texas and Dallas. And the space that is pulled back from the street is set up with chairs for this annual remembrance service. A path goes from the corner, which is where you would cross from City Hall Plaza, goes down to a small old cemetery, Pioneer Cemetery at the bottom, where early leaders of Dallas are buried. You can see the verticality of the IMPA's flagpoles, and then the horizontality of the top member, relate pretty strongly with each other. And the lower volume comes out of the ground, and the upper volume floats, and they're twisted with respect to each other in 3 dimensions. It was a very difficult structural problem, which Thomas Taylor and his group, Thomas is here today. Thomas, raise your hand. There he is. The best engineer I've ever worked with. And he did a marvelous job. Here we are at the entrance opposite the flags, and going along the path up and over to the cemetery. And part of the gateway, as it were, is a photograph we took of one of the policeman's badges who was on the committee, and found somebody in LA who could engrave it very deeply into stainless steel. So it has this, you know, almost ethereal quality of the badge. How it works is that the numbers, the numerals, the badge numbers, which is the code by which the police know them to each other, they sign all their paperwork with their badge number. That's who they are. And those numbers of the fallen officers are cut out of the upper plane. And the sun projects those down onto the pavement and onto the memorial and onto the people who are there. Their names and the badge numbers are engraved on the lower piece where the man is pointing now. Here you see, looking up, you see the badge numbers cut out of the stainless steel plate. We take those numbers and mount them into frames against the fabric that's the uniform fabric of the police department, and those are given to the family. So a little bit of the memorial goes out into the community every time one of these events happens. Some of the details. It was a curious task because so much architecture, when the detail, the building is a lot about its own construction, and we didn't want that because this piece is about the fallen officers. So essentially, we submerged the detailing, but you can still see it. And I can't say enough about the workmanship that the contractor and the fabricator did. When friends came from Europe, they would look at it and say, "Did you import Swiss people to do this?" And I said, "No, this is straight from Dallas." But the precision is just amazing. And you can see in a number of these slides, the geometry of the City Hall is brought back in different ways into the memorial, depending on the angles you're viewing and things like that. I'm going to show 3 housing projects now, which is a building type close to my heart, particularly with Dean Sert. And they're all prototypes. And a prototype tries to solve a general situation, get it to work, and then take that prototype when it meets a real site or a real circumstance and modify it. This is the way most architects work. It's the way the mind works. So instead of designing one-off things, we often design a typical thing, a generalized thing, and then see how it fits into the given situation. If it doesn't fit well, then you have to design a new prototype. But this way you can get some leverage on problems, which is something that modern architecture tried to do, as opposed to the Beaux-Arts, which tended to please the 1% who were paid for it. Modern architecture tried to democratize architecture and construction and deal with problems of most of the people, like housing, schools, factories, retail, healthcare, things that the classical Beaux-Arts had really very little to say about. And it was dealing with prototype housing is something that almost all the great architects did one time or another. Le Corbusier, Frank Lloyd Wright, Mies. So that tradition allows one to try to solve a more general problem, and then we have to see how it works. The first one was built. It's on Throckmorton in the Oak Lawn area of Dallas. A series of courtyard houses. One story. And what I tried to do here was use materials and technology and equipment that could be obtained in the big box retailers like Lowe's and Home Depot. The idea was that small-scale contractors could do it with readily available stuff. The houses were designed to fit on a typical Dallas lot, 2 of them back to back on 50 by 150 feet, which is typical throughout much of residential Dallas, taking into account the setbacks, etc. This is the first page of an article from Arquitectura Viva, and the editor very flatteringly called them catalog courtyard houses because Charles and Ray Eames's house in California was called a catalog house. It used parts and pieces from industrial catalogs of the time to make that really incredible building. So I was very flattered when the editor called it that, and not justified to put in that category at all. But here's the front. There's 3 courtyards. The first courtyard, whoops, okay. I put this in to explain I was in Spain to show the Spanish audience what these big box retailers look like, and there's about 4,000 of them in the United States now. So you're never far from one. And but the first courtyard is for the cars and the entrance. The fences, the surrounding, are the simplest possible. They're 8-foot cyclone fences with climbing jasmine, which grows up in about a year and is evergreen. And so it's very secure but doesn't feel defensive. And so this is the courtyard for the kitchen is behind this glass wall. The glass wall, there's 4 identical glass walls that go back. This is an example of the attitude you tried to take. The trusses for the inclined plane that keeps off the sun and the rain and the hail from your car is made up of 2 2x12s sandwiched together, then 2 2x6s above, tied together with a piece of 3/4-inch plywood, and the diagonals are conduit, electrical conduit with flattened ends. So it was pretty easy to make and not expensive. This shows how it works. The basic thing that makes it all hang together is the common wall between the 2 units, which is lined by storage. you know, I took the notion that you can never have too much storage seriously. And there's about 80 linear feet of it there. In the middle, where it's opposite the second courtyard, becomes bookshelves. And so the first part of the house is living, dining, kitchen. And then the back part is a bedroom, and then a second bedroom, which I call a flex room, which that wall can be opened and closed to make it part of the living area. A lot of the owners have used it as a home office or a guest room. And so you see here at the bottom is the concrete on crushed rock, just aggregate from the concrete yard, and then the fence, the 4 window units, the storage and the kitchen and baths, then the wood skin and the 2x12s spanning the house with the trusses over the cars. We go inside. This is a view of the living room, the courtyard, and the home office behind. We're missing a lot, unfortunately. Now looking back toward the kitchen. This is how the storage works. These are standard flush doors, hollow core doors. And this bank of storage also serves to distribute heating and air conditioning. It comes down from the rooftop unit into a duct at the top of the storage and comes out. And it also serves as a lighting fixture, as indirect lighting throughout the whole house. You can see it there. We're now in the bedroom, the larger bedroom. This is a project I began about 14 years ago or so to see if the amount of money that a working class family spent on rent could be converted into the amount of money it could take for home ownership. So the figures are old, but I think they probably could still work, particularly if the interest rates go down a bit. Take the amount they pay in rent each month, adjust it for the tax advantages of a mortgage, they come up with a number. Now, how much construction budget would that number support? And then what could you build for that amount? And working around, I came up with a notion that, not a new notion, but one that I think works pretty well, of a fourplex, of 4 units together, each quadrant being a dwelling unit, and each unit also having an outdoor space, because for most people, being able to store securely 2 vehicles is important. Working class people, they depend on their vehicles to get to work and to often carry their tools and other things. So accommodating the vehicles in a secure place was essential to me in this project. So you can see one unit, the white one, then there's a frame with an overhead door and a gate so that it comes down and that can be secured for 2 vehicles. And then agricultural shade cloth, which is very expensive. It's about $3 a yard. And, you know, it keeps out about 90% of the sun, stretched over to protect the cars from basically hail, and also keeps them a little bit cooler. Here's the typical fourplex. A simple slab, 2 concrete block walls. The equipment, there's 8 bathrooms that are right clustered, then wood studs, and then brick. Now, brick may sound sort of luxurious, but I looked around, it's painted brick. Once you decide to paint the brick, you can use any brick. And you can go to the brick yards and get the stuff that they can't sell at a really good price. And the idea of a brick house for people, for many, many people, is almost a status symbol that they've arrived. It's sort of the 3 little pigs thing. It can't be blown down. And so the painted brick also allows differentiation of the units very easily and repair by the owners of the units if they get tagged or cracked or something like that. Unit's very simple. There's a small room in the first floor that can be a bedroom, particularly for an elderly that can't use stairs, or a home office or guest room or what have you, and then 2 separate bedrooms upstairs with a space in between that can become almost, if you have a large family, a dormitory or a playroom. And they fit together with the outdoor space and some possibilities of arrangement. This is a project that was just adjusted and finished this year, called Solar Max. And it investigates to what extent, how much solar power can housing generate? You can use the excess power to help pay for the house, if you can sell it back to the grid, or use it to power other houses of a different design that may be mixed into the development. And this particular scheme produces 5 times what it consumes. And so it has a net profit of like 400%. And it's basically a 30-60 degree triangle, 30 degrees being for North Texas, the ideal angle to generate power. And in this, we put a courtyard house, or a house with a courtyard. Materials on the ground floor are insulated concrete block, proprietary block, that's available, it's used in the West, and is made, you can get it made here in Texas. And up above, regular wood frame construction, heavily insulated. This is shown with charred siding or stained siding. It could be any kind of siding that could be introduced for variety or for economy, what have you. Again, there's 2 cars secured, and the gate to there's a continuous porch that shelters the glass from the southern sun in the manner of West Texas porches. This shows if they happen to be all aggregated as a kind of residential solar farm. These are the diagrams and calculations that were done by Professor Timur Dogan, who's the head of the environmental lab at Cornell. And he worked out the energy relationships on the scheme. You see the first floor on the left, the living, dining, kitchen, and the experiment here, interesting, I think, with 2 stairs going up to the bedroom areas, 2 bedrooms, and then again, a flex room that could be an office or a third bedroom or TV room or kids room, whatever, on the second level. And by experimenting with 2 stairs up, it helps the privacy of the bed, of the sleeping areas. And these days, with kids living at home, elderly folks in the family, teenagers, etc., it avoids the problem of everybody going up 1 stair into a narrow 3.5 foot corridor, and getting their privacy is limited to the door of their hollow core door of their bedroom. So this is an attempt to extend that zone of privacy farther down into the house for the kind of mixed families that we see a lot today. I propose, like in North Dallas, I propose vines on all the masonry walls. We're looking up close. Again, some possibilities of adjusting, but I think the real exciting part would be to mix these with other types of housing and sell the whole package as one that meets 100% of one's energy needs. And finally, if they were all the same, this is what a street might look like. Now the last project. Here, this one isn't built, but it might be. It's in Urban Commons, a project in Richardson, just north of 635. You can see it up there. Series of about 80 compact detached houses. is the proposal. And I have 3 lots of the small ones, the yellow. And each of the houses throughout the project is separated by a 10-foot side yard. And so each house, even though it's tight, is freestanding. So the question is, make a nice house, and also what do you do with that little side yard? So what I've done here is use the side yard as an entry garden, and the footprint of the house itself is 40 feet by 20 feet. That's the allowable build. I've tried to use plant materials to give a much more residential character and a kind of softness to these houses. I do think that the future in architecture is going to rely more and more on vegetation. It's not expensive. People like it. It creates a much softer environment, etc. So what I've done here is take the greenery from this common area between 2 rows of houses and bring it up to the top of the balustrade of the 2nd level. The houses have a wide front porch, full width of the site, and then the vines grow up a trellis. So the vines are visible from the inside. So looking out, we'll see later, we have a green, a living wall on your balcony. The ground floor and the front and rear facades are the omni-block, the insulated block that I used in the previous scheme. And then the sidewalls, the long sidewalls that face each other, are siding, metal siding or wood siding, and largely unbroken, insulated, heavily insulated. And at the top, enough solar power to handle the needs of that dwelling. From the rear on the street, plans are really simple. The cars and then a 3rd bedroom or a home office on the ground floor. There's a total of 3, what can be 3 bedrooms, each with its own bath. And the location of the stair is interesting because it fronts the glass of the porch. And because of that, southern light bouncing in goes down to the ground floor and up to the 3rd floor. And so you get oriented on that, in that stair by its relationship to the porch. If you come in through the garage or through the gate, I mean, it's a very rambunctious planting scheme, but it doesn't take much. And it's 40 inches, 40 inches, 40 inches. Here you can see, looking over the balcony rail, over the greenery, and down in the stairs, and into the living room and off through the kitchen, which has planting box just outside the sliding windows so that you see green in both directions. And people like it. They think they say, we can grow herbs out there, and when we cook, we just open the window and snip what we need and put it in the pot. Now, looking down, we see the car below. Now we're standing really in the kitchen, looking at the dining area, the living area, and then the balcony, or the porch railing, which at this time of year you could put little mini lights on it, Christmas lights. It would be rather nice out there. And here's what the ensemble might look like from the common space between the two rows of housing. So we're going to leave Richardson, and thank you very much.
Are you planning on building those yourself?
Are you planning on building those yourself?
I hope. With today's market and the interest rates and what have you, it's very difficult to build things that are competitive economically. These are meant to be, really middle class housing. There's not a lot of money to waste on them at all. I mean, for example, the trellis in front is made out of cattle panels from the farm and ranch store. And those cost, the 4 of them, and they cost about $50 a piece. So that'll take care of that detail. And you have to almost go around the building, or any building, and see what you can do with what's available, which I find immensely satisfying and very much part of the deepest roots of modern art and modern architecture, of working with the found object, the everyday. I mean, this is what the great collagists did. This is what, when Picasso did his famous bull sculpture with the bicycle seat, rusted bicycle seat as the bull's head and rusted handlebars above it from the junkyard. But finding ways of using what's available, kind of even a bricolage of stuff, of what works. You don't have to custom design everything. I think the most important architects, working today are the French couple of Lacaton and Vassal. Not the prettiest buildings, but the most important ones. And they take the roots of modern architecture very seriously. For the masses, affordable, very cleverly using things that we all know about, but changing their context a bit. They're the ones that had they had a major exhibit at MoMA of their work, and their most famous project is a housing tower in Paris, public housing, in a really sort of grim neighborhood. And there was a proposal to tear it down. This modern concrete frame slab. And they submitted a proposal. Let us try to save it for the same amount of money that it would take to demolish it and carry away the rubble. And what they did was add 3 meters to each side. Independent structure, 10 feet, and took out the existing non-bearing walls and put in just aluminum sliders, and then put aluminum sliders on the outside wall. So every room got an extra room that could open as a balcony in the summer or close as an extension to a kid's room or a winter garden, etc. And so the whole building changed from this sort of hodgepodge of stucco, with modernist shapes on it, to this aluminum and glass facade. And suddenly, middle-class people were wanting to get in, and they'd worked it out so that the existing residents, who were largely immigrants in that area of Paris, didn't have to leave the building during construction. They sort of moved people around. Actually, Anne Lacaton spoke here a number of years ago and showed the scheme. Another great project of theirs, I think, there was a competition for a square in Bordeaux to redo it. And they looked at it and they made a proposal that said, frankly, all it needed was better maintenance. And they won the competition. And with the another, it's sort of common sense stuff. One of my favorite projects of theirs was an exhibit hall in North Paris. And usually it was a kind of thing where they have trade shows, like a convention center, a small convention center, which usually have the dumbest facades you can imagine, just dead. What they did is they took greenhouse technology and about 6 feet apart put 2 polycarbonate clear walls with plants in between and trellis and drip irrigation, etc. So the walls, these 6 foot thick, or maybe 8 foot, I don't know, thin greenhouses make up the walls of the building. So, and with all this lush vegetation in it. So the neighborhood, instead of having these dumb blank walls that we see on every convention center, it's just sort of a vitrine of a garden. And at night, it's backlit, and from the inside, the shadows come through of the plants, and that becomes a backdrop of exhibits. And it's much cheaper. And so anyway, those are, like I say, I think they're the most important, if not the prettiest architects.
What's their name again? The name again of the firm?
Lacaton, Lacaton, and Vassal, Vassal. They're a couple. And they worked in sub-Saharan Africa as young people. And that's where they sort of learned how to make do with a minimum amount of stuff.
Her lecture is on our YouTube channel.
Yeah. And they got the Pritzker Prize 2 or 3 years ago.